So I spent the last year working on groundwater in the APY Lands, and I didn't put an acknowledgement slide up, but Stephen Howes is probably one of the main guys that I work with, and SA Water, the remote communities, Grant McLean and Simon Wurst, and the dip tie guys working on the road upgrade. So we worked on 6 communities in APY Lands, or Musgrave Province, depending if you're a geologist or a cultural heritage expert. So Armata, Pukecho, Ernabella, Kenmore Park, Freegon, Mimili and Indulkina. And for dip tie, we tried to find some water on there. They've got a $106 million road upgrade. So yeah, we worked on that. Actually, one of the things while I was reviewing this, I got advice from my bosses to put challenges in the title, but thinking about it, it's more about outcomes and opportunities rather than just difficulties. So I'll try and spin it a little bit more positively than the title sets it up to be. That's better. So just brief history of the APY Lands. It's actually owned by the Aboriginal people, the different tribes. It's solely their land. And I think there's a bit over 2,000 people living there now. They've lived there for a long time, and they've been very resourceful in sourcing water from rock holes, soaks. Ernabella is a famous site where I guess it was discovered long before that, but Ernest Giles came across it in 1873, the soak at Ernabella, and they used tree roots and stuff like that to find their water, but that's kind of a different side of things to what I'm talking about. So in the 1930s, the pastoral leases really started to expand, and there was a lot of mission people go up there as well. They were mainly concerned with making sure the Aboriginal people weren't abused in the workforce, which is a lot of that kind of stuff happening, and I guess some genocidal kind of type activity. Anyway, so many of the early wells were hand dug, and a lot of them are still there on the stations in quite good condition. The 1970s saw quite a big change in government interest in the APY Lands. I didn't dig into it much, but since the 70s there's been a lot of drilling. Maybe it was the modern drilling techniques made it a bit more kind of attainable to go and drill, but yeah, there was been a lot more activity since the 1970s. One key feature is that they often drill very shallow wells targeting the alluvial sediments, which are not very extensive, rely on rainfall, which there's not much of up there. If there is groundwater, it's often compartmentalised. Salinity, nitrates, fluoride levels are often really close to World Health Organisation limits, so it's a pretty tough place for groundwater, and the demand's been increasing as well. So I guess the challenges that we came up against were this compartmentalised aquifers, the low sporadic rainfall and recharge. I think there's this graph here is from Bob Reed, but I think it's, what's that? I think it was sometime back in the early 2000s since the last significant rainfall, although I think they might have just had some recently as well. There's very limited subsurface knowledge of the geology, and I guess the hydrogeology as well. The evaporation rate exceeds 3.5 metres, and they definitely don't get that much rainfall, so the shallow alluvial aquifers being there at all is amazing. Groundwater salinity is very variable, so often they have RO plants, which means it's an extra cost for SA Water to manage. Depths of the alluvial aquifers, the structural deformity. It's a really interesting place for geologists, the Musgrave Province, and in the ranges it's quite well understood, but in terms of out on the plains where a lot of the communities are, there's not a lot of information and not a lot of knowledge. So sparse drill hole data. And one thing I forgot to mention, Tim's here from the CSIRO. They helped us with some geophysical interpretation, which tried to help define the faults a little bit better in the area, but that's something that is still quite tough given the condition and the detail that we've got in the data at the moment. It's really remote, it's really expensive to get things there, and the roads are terrible, which I guess dip tie doing that upgrade is really going to help. So a site selection, we really tried to focus on, got myself all mixed up here, on a few specific things that would help us, sorry, find myself. Alright, so a few specific things that would help us target as many of the groundwater features as possible. So fractured basement, adjacent to drainage, increase the depth. Often a lot of drill holes are 30 metres or less in depth, and often they'll end up finishing in sediments or weathered basement, which we found if you kept drilling in those circumstances, often we'd find water, and then after the first water cut we'd find more water. So that's something that was a positive. If we could get it near a fault, that was something that we'd try to target, just for hoping that there'd be recharge and some stored water within the fractured rock. And like I said, CSIRO and the Geological Survey of South Australia helped with some geophysical interpretation. So from our drilling, we definitely saw that there's these compartmentalised aquifers. Probably we had two really good examples. We were drilling re-drills for the town water supply in Mimilly and Fregon. In Mimilly, we drilled 3 holes within 49 metres of an existing town water supply well, and it was only on the third shot that we managed to hit the same water supply that the first one did. So we were drilling and just finding absolutely nothing within 40 metres of a good existing water supply. So just that kind of